Welcome everybody to day 3 of our program. We've had an overview of the various set-aside programs. We've talked a little bit about more complex opportunities with the mentor-protege and joint venture and the similarly situated opportunities. What I'd like to try to do today is focus on the current trends that are occurring in the federal marketplace. So as we've sort of alluded to throughout our various sessions, definitely there are initiatives within the Biden administration to make sure that the underserved community plays a broader role in federal procurement. There's also significant data that suggests that the industrial base has shrunk when it comes to federal procurement. And as we saw during COVID, there are challenges with the supply chain and manufacturing in the US. And all these are sort of coming together to potentially create opportunities for small businesses, for new entrants, whereas probably over the last 5 to 8 years, and we'll show some of these charts, we've seen a significant reduction in individual small businesses participating in the federal marketplace, and we've seen a significant reduction of new entrants. And ultimately, it's not just a question of, hey, we need more small businesses. Ultimately, spend on products by the US government, as directed by the Small Business Administration, the Small Business Act is supposed to impact economic development. The federal government is the largest buyer of services, goods, and products, and the act is a catalyst for economic development, and so that needs to occur. And then on the other side of it, as far as the buyer and as far as the federal government, it's really important that we maintain a strong industrial base, a strong supply chain, ultimately to make sure when you think about the Department of Defense, the Department of Defense has access to the best and brightest, right? And so all of these sort of come into play and work hand in hand with respect to making sure that small businesses and socioeconomically disadvantaged small businesses participate in the federal marketplace. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about the current trends in the federal marketplace, where we see the dollars and where they're going and what COVID did. I want to talk about administration priorities, executive orders, some regulatory changes, and ultimately also category management, and really talk about what category management is and isn't. I know there's a lot of discussions about category management. We talk about the negative impact it has on small businesses and participation. I want to show those charts and the impacts over the last several years, but I also want to talk about, as a strategy, how do we sort of counteract what we see in the federal marketplace, and that's sort of the small business strategies. Overall, we've talked about this on day 1. Overall, federal spend has gone up significantly, and the federal government hasn't published 2021 numbers yet. It takes them a while to publish their final numbers, but overall, federal spend, as a result, as you can imagine, as a result of COVID, was significantly higher in 2020, and a good amount of that, right, was COVID related. When you look at where did that increase occur and where did the spend go, again, kind of intuitively, we know a significant amount went to medical, research and development, and then the last two, professional services and information technology. Why did we see increases in that? Professional services with respect to supporting COVID response. Information technology, as you probably hear in the news more and more so every day, there's a lot of focus on cybersecurity. There's a lot of focus on protecting the infrastructure. And what does that mean and how do we do it? And so engaging firms and specialists that can support the federal government is an important aspect of federal buying, and it's becoming more and more so in the near future. So this, again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend looking at this and saying, oh, I got to get into medical or I got to get into research and development, but it gives an indication of where the federal government spends a lot of money. It gives an idea of certain trends, and then certainly if we're a Native Hawaiian organization or a tribal organization or an Alaskan Native organization that can add new entities and can have multiple entities, certainly these are areas to at least consider. And we've talked about NHOs, tribes adding new entities. The other thing that we sort of haven't talked about, and I'm happy to have discussions around, is NHOs can grow organically, but NHOs and tribes can also grow through acquisition. So creating strategies around acquisition when you're identifying certain areas that you might be interested in getting into, certainly that sheds some light on where we may be interested in making some acquisitions. And then, as we've talked about, a significant portion of this goes to small businesses, and in 2020, $144 billion went to small businesses. So that's, and that's every year, between $100 and $150 billion going to small businesses. That is a significant opportunity for economic development in our communities. It's a significant opportunity for small businesses and socioeconomic small businesses to participate in the federal marketplace. If you look at sort of spend over time, you'll see that, in between 2010 and 2015, you had sequestration and federal government cutbacks. As you'll see, obviously, over the last year, year and a half, 2 years, it's gone significantly up due to COVID and some of the responses to what's going on geopolitically. I think what we realized as a result of COVID, which plays into administration priorities, is that spend went up, right? Firms that were established and had the current relationships and were trusted partners, they received significant revenues as a result of COVID, right? So if you were trusted, if you had 8A sole source authority, if you were an established NHO, tribal, Alaskan Native Corporation, you're a trusted partner, the federal government needed support, they needed the ability to engage, and they had to spend. Those are the companies that did really well. If you look at the trend, the entities that really got hurt were the new entrants, right? Because we went into a period of COVID, we went into an area and a time period where networking, developing relationships, building capacity with BD, those things just weren't possible. Now, the federal government tried to do that, virtually and other ways, but you couldn't have your NHOA conference. You didn't have your National 8A conference. And then you didn't have any of the matchmaking happening. So if you were a new entrant, developing those relationships became almost impossible. And the government relied, in order to support the needs, on the trusted partners they already had. So as an example for us, when you first saw COVID hit, we saw a quick dip in our clients' revenues. But that was short-lived. And it was really around, do we have access to facilities, and how do we get on facilities, and if we're cleared, can we work from home? Right after that, it kind of shot up because the government had to rely on those trusted partners. And that's also when you see the 8A program, for those that are in the 8A program and received an additional year, that's as a result of that, right? Because you had a whole year where you weren't able to participate in matchmaking and networking and all those things, engaging with the OSDBU, Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. Those things just couldn't occur. So that's why there was an initiative around extending the 8A program by at least 1 year. Any questions on that? Yes, ma'am. So the question was category management and the impact of category management. But you're absolutely right. Category management had a significant impact on new entrants. As you bundle requirements, as you consolidate requirements, there are fewer and fewer one-off requirements available, the smaller requirements available for smaller firms to be able to compete. So a lot of potential new entrants look at the marketplace and say, I can't be competitive in that. So you're absolutely right. Category management had a significant negative impact on participation, either from existing small businesses or the new entrants. And we have some numbers that we'll share at the end of the presentation as well. But that, I think, in my mind, category management had a significant impact on participation. So category management was established, originally it was called strategic sourcing. And it was established as a way for the federal government to buy smarter, right? Kind of like Walmart. And the federal government did an analysis and they said, wait a second, they did one vendor, and I think it was KPMG at the time. They said, wait a second, Department of Defense and Commerce are buying the same thing, same service, same statement of work, but Department of Defense is paying this and Commerce is paying this. There's no consistency between any of this. And none of the terms and conditions of the contracts match, and we're just not doing this efficiently. So they said, let's buy like Walmart. Let's just create one master contract. And I always give the example of widgets. Let's just create one huge widgets contract. And I don't care if you're the Department of Defense, if you're Commerce, if you're the Small Business Administration, if you want to buy widgets, you have to go to this contract. And that'll build up volume and drive down prices, right? And certainly, we can have multiple contract holders. We can even have 20 contract holders. And guess what? We'll meet our small business goal because out of the 20, 10 of them will be small. However, the challenge is, yes, you will build volume. Yes, you will drive down prices. Yes, you'll meet your goals with 10 of those small companies. Those 10 small companies aren't going to be small for long. And what happens to the thousands of other small businesses that were providing widgets to the government before you set up this vehicle? So that was strategic sourcing. And at the time, when I was at the SBA, I was the representative from the Small Business Administration on the Strategic Sourcing Leadership Council. And we had to vote. Do we agree to this vehicle? And is our agency going to commit to this vehicle? So every time it came up for a vote, I always voted no. And so that became very contentious with the White House and OMB and others. And I get it. In one aspect, the federal government needs to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar, right? They should buy more efficiently. But you can't forget that the federal government also has the prerogative or the initiative or the requirement to spend its money in such a way that supports economic development. And so they can't just think, hey, we're Walmart, we're going to buy like Walmart. They have different stakeholders. They don't have stockholders, they have stakeholders. And those stakeholders are the underserved communities, the small business communities, the industrial base. They should be concerned about that. Because what happens in my example, now you have, instead of thousands of widget makers, you have 20. And those guys aren't going to have contracts. In 5 years, when this contract comes up for rebid, they're all going to be out of business. Now you're stuck with 20 widget builders that are going to say, okay, we have a monopoly. We're going to increase the prices. So it also hurts competition. Not only does it hurt your industrial base, it also hurts competition. So because of the pushback in strategic sourcing, it evolved into quote unquote category management. And the way it evolved was that, okay, we're not just going to set up vehicles. So it's not all about Alliant or Oasis or the other variants of these best-in-class vehicles. They said, we're also going to share best terms and conditions. So there is a category management hallway, and there's a public view and there's a government view. And so they better shared terms and conditions, so GSA would know what DoD spent and Commerce would know what SBA spent. But ultimately, even though they created these hallways, and these are the categories, even though they created these hallways, ultimately, category management was still a lot about vehicles and commitment to vehicles. So a lot of all these categories, and I guarantee almost 90% of the folks that are either here today or listening fall into one of these categories. All these categories were subject to category management. And what does that mean, subject to category management? That meant that every year, the federal government was required to bring more dollars under management, meaning more individual requirements were getting pulled out and more requirements were being put in one of the best-in-class vehicles. And so, as you saw, as the question from earlier, as those individual requirements get pulled out and get put on the best-in-class vehicles, there's only so many companies that have those best-in-class vehicles, and yes, you'll meet your goals, but you'll meet them with much fewer companies. As you saw, that had an impact on new entrants and their ability to participate in the marketplace. And so these are the categories, and I know this is small, but these will be shared. These are the best-in-class vehicles. And again, GSA is pretty transparent about all this. I mean, they really have a good category management website, both a public view and a government view. But you can go in there, you can see which vehicle has how much spend, you can drill down on the different vehicles to see their small business spend and their different socio-category spends. And they have a list of all the best-in-class vehicles, but they are basically in almost every industry that the federal government procures in, right? So this created an environment where if you see sort of the trend and what this shows, right? This goes back to the firms that already had networks did well, the firms that didn't do so well. So if you look at the top 35 districts in federal contracting, right? So if you think about Washington, D.C., I don't know, like down near Huntsville, Alabama, San Diego, those top 35 districts, you see how they fared over from 2012 to 2020. The others that don't fall in those top 35 districts, federal contracting dollars didn't really flow to those communities. It stayed stagnant, maybe slightly increased. So it has had a significant impact on this. Here's another data set. If you look at the number of small businesses participating in federal contracting, in other words, if you look at how many small businesses actually received one or more contracts, you can see the significant downturn that occurred from 2011 down to 2020, right? So the number of individual companies, small businesses receiving contracts is significantly down due to category management. And then if you look at number of new entrants, that's literally down like 60%. So the number of small businesses entering the federal marketplace was down over 60% between 2012 and 2019. And this is all not just, even if you wanted to buy like Walmart, right? Which the federal government shouldn't want to buy like Walmart because, as we said, they have stakeholders and not stockholders. But even if you wanted to buy as Walmart, this is a significant negative to competition, right? Because you have new entrants. What happens to competition? What happens to pricing? What happens to your industrial base? What happens to innovation? And then you have the whole question of how is the federal government complying with the Small Business Act and making sure that the benefits flow to the intended recipients, that the benefits flow to the underserved communities when less and less participants are in the marketplace. And then one of the things in 2017, when category management was really taking off, and as federal agencies have small business goals, so the 235533, agencies were given category management goals as well. Each year they were supposed to bring in 10% more contracts and dollars under category management. And so Bloomberg did a study that said 80,000 contracts are at risk of disappearing and going under category management, right? This analysis, that's a follow-on for the GAO did, was that no, actually 138,000 contracts were reduced between 2016 and 2019. And as you'll see here, 53% of those contracts were small business contracts. 47% were large contracts. So it's had a significant negative impact. Now, you might say, and arguably, There are other barriers to entry, right? For those that are familiar with CMMC, but there are requirements for cybersecurity, right? And all contractors, DoD came out with that. It's requiring firms to be compliant. That's a hurdle, right? To make sure that you're CMMC compliant, that you have the right systems to prevent cyber attacks is a hurdle. And if that, as that expands, I shouldn't say if, as that expands to other federal agencies, and that's been delayed a little bit because it's a hurdle for small businesses, but as that expands to other agencies, it's expensive to be CMMC compliant, right? Both Department of Defense and SBA understand that as a hurdle and have created resources. So if you go to the OSBB website at DoD, they'll have resources available to understand what it means to be compliant and some resources to help you become compliant. But those are all additional expenses and barriers to entry. As category management was sort of taking off, there was certain things that we worked with. So yes, we always voted no, right? But there were certain things that we worked on because the train had sort of left the station and category management wasn't going to be clawed back in, right? So if that was going to happen, there's some best practices that were shared to make sure that these vehicles at least allow, to the extent possible, small business participation. One was that, like we talked about, there's 10 that win the contract, right? They get the golden ticket because they're on that vehicle. They're gonna get tons of money. There should be on and off ramps, right? So you grow, you're no longer small, you shouldn't be on the vehicle. There should be an off ramp. There should be an on ramp to allow a new participant to play in that marketplace. There should also be not just small business tracks, but there should be socio categories, right? So if we're gonna do an alliance, and there's going to be a small business alliance so agencies can meet their goals, there should be an 8A, there should be a hub zone, there should be a women-owned and service-disabled so that they can meet all their socio goals. And then if we're going down this path, if contracts are getting consolidated and bundled, then we should have strong subcontracting plans. And we could get into a whole discussion around challenges around subcontracting. As a subcontractor, your access to the federal government is limited. As a subcontractor, you kind of work at the behest of the prime contractor. As a subcontractor, the federal government is reluctant to reach in and help you as a subcontractor, and the prime contractor takes away contracts from you or work from you and doesn't assign work to you. So there is challenges with being a subcontractor, but one of the requirements was that if we're gonna have these consolidated large projects, we should have really strong subcontracting plans, and we should really monitor them closely and take corrective measures and actions when appropriate. And then, refrain from consolidating and bundling. That goes back to the question of pulling requirements out of either the small business program or the 8A program. If they are in those programs, we should refrain from making them larger so that the incumbents are incapable of participating and bidding on them. And then the last kind of several ones are we getting a PCR, procurement center review, a procurement center representative review of the change in acquisition strategy, right? If we're seeing requirements get pulled out and put on Alliant, we should be telling a PCR. If we're an 8A, we should be telling our BOS. That should be elevated so that the proper review is being done before that requirement gets pulled out. And then making sure the rule of two occurs, and the last one is taking advantage of sole source authority. If the reason to going to category management is streamlining and simplifying, one of the easiest ways to streamline and simplify is to do a sole source. Instead of category management, is there a path to sole source? And for those that don't know, 8A is obviously one of the easy ways to sole source. The Small Business Innovation and Research Program is also a different way to sole source. Any questions so far on category management, strategic sourcing? Yeah, so that's a good question. So the question is, do the schedules make sense because there's so many folks on the various schedules? They do now it's expensive to get on a schedule, right? And it takes a lot of resources, and there's consultants that specialize in all that. So it can take money and resources. But I'd say, to the question, is it worth to get on a schedule? I'd flip it around the other way. In day one, we talked about how is the government buying what we're selling. If we're seeing a lot of the requirements that we're interested in going through IT 70, then we're going to need IT 70, right? If we're seeing a lot of the requirements we're interested in going through OASIS, then we want to either figure out when the next on-ramp is, and I'm pretty sure the last on-ramp closed not long ago, but we want to see who potential partners are. And the other strategy is, if we have been working on a requirement for the last 3 years, and this happens to a lot of our clients, right? You got sole source multiple times, right? All of a sudden it disappears, and you're like, where'd that go? So number one, you should be talking to your clients and saying, hey, is this at risk of going to a best-in-class vehicle? So you know. Number two, complain to the SBA. But number three, if we're the incumbent and it ends up with an OASIS, who's a good partner? Because you bring all the past performance and quals, and you're the incumbent, so someone that has that vehicle would be interested in partnering with you. So that's another strategy for making sure that you continue participating. But back to the question, yeah, depending on how the government is buying, it's important to understand which vehicles we're interested in. And then back to something that we mentioned earlier on, one of the strategies is, hey, I don't have Alliant, I don't have OASIS. Does a company have those vehicles that's a graduating 8A, and can we acquire them? Because now all of a sudden I just capture those vehicles, right? I don't have to wait for the onboarding. I don't have to wait for the on-ramp. So there are different strategies with respect to how to best participate in the marketplace that we're seeing, right? And again, over here, I would say you should always have discussions with your buyer, because they're getting tasked with not only their small business goals, they're getting tasked with their category management goals. So I have a discussion with your contracting officer, your program office. Hey, this requirement, we've been doing a great job. It's coming up for rebid. We always get it. Is there a change in acquisition strategy? Is there an initiative to get this on one of those other vehicles? And then as you identify potential partners, or if things are moving over, how do we create partnerships with folks that have the vehicles? And then ultimately, if we can't do any of those things, is there an acquisition target that gets us where we need to get? And how do we structure that, and how do we take advantage of that? And then you have to be careful once you acquire a firm. Are we still small? Do we have the same designations? Can the contracts transfer? But those are all things that you need to consider in that strategy. So real quick, I think it's really important, especially when we go to conferences. We always hear about, these laws are going to change. The National Defense Authorization Act is going to change X, Y, and Z. Or this regulation is going to change. Or this policy is going to change. I think for me, in my previous life, I used to chair an association that represented small business government contractors. And it was so hard to sort of just get a grasp of how's the landscape changing. Because you hear about these proposed laws and then regs and then policies. How does that impact me today, tomorrow, and then the next 5 years? So when we look at laws, and when you go to conferences, like the SBA, like a John Klein will say, these are potential changes in law. Well, what does that mean? Number one, they're potential proposed changes, right? Number two, even if the law changes, it takes the better part of 3 to 5 years to get that law into regulation and implement it. I'll give you the All Small Mentor Protege program that we spoke in day 2. The Mentor Protege program didn't get expanded out of the 8A program until 2010 by statute, right? 2010. That was the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010. It took the better part of 6 years to take that statute, get it into regulation, and launch the All Small Mentor Protege program. So it's a time-consuming process. But the one thing that I'd say is that time provided opportunity for industry to give their input. So when you change the regulations to expand the Mentor Protege program, that went through a public comment period. So associations and individual companies had the opportunity to comment on those. And the one thing that I'd say is, even when I chaired an association, I was like, I don't need to comment on these. Who's going to really pay attention to me? Having been inside the agency, every comment has to be considered. And then they have to go through and say, yeah, we agree with this, or no, this is why we don't agree with this. So I'd encourage, groups like the National Center, the NHOA, HubZone Council, individual companies to comment on how these statutes are being implemented. But overall, laws take a lot of time to implement, right? 48 months. Regulations can be shorter. Once we get to a regulation, let's say the size standards. So a lot of folks don't know that the proposed changes to the size standards came out in November, December of 2020, right? So that went through public comment. That's a 3-month process. They revised it. It's going through interagency comments. So that's like up to a 36-month period. And then ultimately, policies don't go through any rulemaking process, right? That's the things that I think is a little bit hard to grasp, because category management, as an example, was a policy. It came out from Office of Management and Budget and Office of Federal Procurement Policy, and it became initiatives that agencies were implementing without the benefit of going through public rulemaking and without the benefit of getting public comments on it. So the ultimate impact was significant to small businesses, yet the general community didn't have an opportunity to comment on those. So having said that, like what are the initiatives around the administration? One is the administration, as soon as it sort of came in, there was significant emphasis, and this was part of the Biden administration's campaign as well. There was significant emphasis on increasing the goals, not only on, as we've heard in sort of news stories, et cetera, not only in the 8A program and the Small Disadvantaged program, but also in women-owned, HubZone, et cetera. Now, the 8A goals have, through executive order, been required to increase to 15% by 2024. And that means by the end of this year, through executive order, they're requiring that we hit at least a goal or performance of 11%. So that was one initiative, right? Increasing the goals and hitting higher targets. Another initiative has been re-emphasizing small business programs. So as we talked in day one, every agency has an Office of Small Business Programs or an OSDBU. Sometimes those agencies can be buried in the administration, in the bureaucracy of that agency. And so there's been significant initiative to make sure that those offices report to the highest positions in the agency. So reporting to a deputy secretary or higher is a requirement under this administration. Reassessing category management. So we talked about earlier about the challenges and the impact that category management has been having. So under the new administration, initially right off the gate, they said they would reassess category management. One of the slides that we have in our deck has the latest executive order and OMB memo, Office of Management and Budget memo, that says we can't emphasize category management when it creates a loss to small businesses. And your small business performance, so if you're hitting your small business performance and you're contracting with small businesses, it can count towards your category management goals, right? So they didn't say we're going to take the category management goals away, but they said when you spend with small business, that's the same as using category management. So that's been sort of the initiatives around the current administration. Two other things that I think is important for SDVOSBs, the statute requires that the certification move over to the SBA, and it also requires that front-end certification happens for all SDVOSBs. And then the other thing I think that's important with respect to administration strategy is what we talked about, subcontracting. So as we see consolidation, as we see bundling, as we see larger contracts, we have to see stronger subcontracting plans and enforcement, and that's an initiative in this administration. So I do want to sort of talk a little bit about this memo OMB memo that recently came out. And the real significant piece of that, I think, is what I just mentioned. The real significant piece of that OMB memo was that the administration set a goal of 15% by 2025, and it directed agencies to meet 11% by 2022. The other significant item was that what I mentioned with category management. Your small business spend and performance will count against not just your small business, but also against your category management goals. So now it sort of de-emphasizes category management spend. And then the other interesting thing is that the SBA and Department of Commerce's Minority Business Development Administration, MBDA, are again voting members of the Category Management Leadership Council. So now again they have a vote on Category Management Leadership Council. And the last thing that I'll say on this slide is that one of the things we realized under the Obama administration was that, and we talked about this early on, I think it was in day one, it's that the money goes to the program office. The contracting office just executes the contract. So one of the things we realized early on was that if you kept the program office accountable to small business goals, things changed. And how did you keep them accountable? You said, hey, at the end of the year, you get an evaluation, 1 through 5. And if you get a 5, you get a bonus. If you get a 4, your bonus is lower. If you get a 3, you don't get a bonus. And so making small business goals a part of that evaluation really changed the dynamics. So the current administration has done something similar. So if you're a senior executive service member, if you have a budget, if you're not meeting your goals, your small business goals for your agency, you're not going to get a 5. So that creates an interest in making sure that those goals are met because it's tied to their bonus at the end of the year. And then the other thing, I guess, is that emphasizing the Office of Small Business Programs, not only in the sense that they're reporting to senior executives at the agency, like the secretary or the deputy secretary, but also emphasizing that they need to be a part of the acquisition strategy. So when the contracting officer is performing the acquisition strategy, when the contracting officer is doing the market research and trying to identify small businesses to set the requirement aside, it's now a prerogative and a direction by OMB that those contracting officers engage the directors of the small business programs and the procurement center representatives in that procurement strategy. Now, what I will say is that if you have less than 70 PCRs for the entire country for all the buying activities, I'm not sure how engaged they're going to be, but that is an initiative. And this goes back again to we're the eyes of the community, we're the eyes and ears. If we're seeing things that are not conducive to small business spend and are contrary to the regs, we should bringing that to the attention of the PCR. Okay, I want to thank you guys for being here. I want to thank, as I said earlier, the National Center, the Native Hawaiin Organization Association, and it's always nice to be in Hawaii, and it's always nice to be able to share some of the knowledge that we have. Thank you, guys.
So I'm Richard. I'm with manager with JLV Integration Technologies, and we're a subcontractor providing IT services through a prime contract with the Department of Defense. We want to just continue, developing the work that we're currently doing with the Department of Defense, and maybe taking advantage of other contracts with other agencies, maybe in the health IT sector. I really enjoyed the contracting presentation today, but it really helped to have someone with all of the knowledge that he had, John, to kind of just connect all the dots, basically. So now I have a better understanding of what my company is going to be needing to do to remain compliant in the 8A program, and how to be aware of new contracting opportunities and connect with the right people to get those opportunities. So it was very helpful. I'm so glad that I came.
Yat e she Joanne begay no tayin shia. Ashi hinishlo my dishki ni bashis chin. Toba e dashe do touchit ni dashanale. Digit our son nishlim. I guess you didn't think this session was going to be shared in the Navajo language, but it's just my formal Navajo tribal introduction. I shared my clans to introduce myself to the holy people as well as my relatives in the room. Today, I'm going to share with you information about our National Center's newest program called the Arizona Minority Business Development Agency Export Center. So my name is Joanne Begay-Nota. I'm a Navajo tribal member from the Navajo Nation in Arizona. My community is a very small community called Kintlachi. It's near Window Rock, which is the capital of the Navajo Nation. I'm the new project director for our export center. I just started last week, so this is my very first presentation for this program. But in my previous position, I was the senior procurement specialist with the National Center's Procurement Technical Assistance Center. I covered the Navajo Nation in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. So I had a 27,000-mile coverage area. So I enjoyed my work with the Navajo Nation, but I'm really excited about this new program because it gives me an expanded territory, in fact, globally. So our international trade business will be reaching out to companies that are looking at doing business with other countries internationally. So this is our program, the Arizona MBDA Export Center. Our parent company is the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development. The National Center has been around for over 50 years. And specifically, we had tribal members that started the organization back in 1969 in California. And so they wanted to look for opportunities for our Native American and tribally owned businesses. And so they started out with business development grants from different agencies, federal agencies. So the National Center has grown over the years, and we have several different programs that are operated by the National Center, and our MBDA Export Center is the newest program. In our MBDA family, there are 4 of the Export Center programs. We're one of them in Arizona. We're based in Phoenix, Arizona, and then we also have another Export Center in Miami, Florida, in San Antonio, Texas, as well as Houston, Texas. The MBDA also has other programs called the Advanced Manufacturing Centers. So the manufacturing centers focus on those types of companies or minority business enterprises that are looking to export locally, domestically, and also globally. So it's part of the Made in America initiative under MBDA. And there's also another office in Washington, D.C. called the MBDA Federal Procurement Center. And so they pretty much do the same thing we do in working with MBAs on contract opportunities within the United States. This is our information about our MBDA Export Center. We are to expand and create domestic and global economic development opportunities. For us, we're working with American Indian tribes, Native Hawaiin Organizations, as well as Alaska Native corporations. So what we want to do is provide training and different resources for our MBEs in terms of the events that we are doing, our monthly trade talks. Next month in April, we'll be doing a trade talk on doing business with Canada. So if you're interested in doing business with Canada, that'll be a very informative session for you. It'll be a virtual webinar, so it's accessible to all that are interested. Then our next event will take place on April 18th through the 21st. We will be participating and presenting at the Navajo Nation Economic Summit. So that's hosted on the Navajo Nation at the Twin Arrows Resort and Casino in Flagstaff, Arizona. And then the next one we have in May is our biggest National Center event. We've been doing RES for a lot of years, and this year we're hosting it on May 23rd to the 26th at the Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. So that's a good opportunity to network with other MBEs, and specifically the American Indian businesses and tribal enterprises. In our program, we also are working with the U.S. Department of Commerce, with the MBDA International Trade Association, and we also have partnered with the Export-Import Bank of the U.S. Aside from that, we are the only export center that's focusing on American Indian businesses and tribal enterprises, and the Alaska Native corporations as well as the NHOs. So that's our I guess that's our niche, you would call it. So our program services include direct matching. We do business matchmaking with our clients, with outside entities that are looking to do business with American companies. We also will be providing, like I said, the additional training for information for our clients on how to get into exporting, what the requirements are, if you need an export license, as well as planning strategic growth. If you're looking at expanding to other countries, we can help you identify your market in those areas as well. Any clients that are interested in joint ventures and mergers and acquisitions, we have resources within the Department of Commerce that can assist with that as well. And with the National Center, all the programs we work at, helping our clients to expand their business, establish their business, and also networking. So that's the reason why we do the Economic Summit every year, as well as other events throughout the year, like the Native Edge Institutes as well. And we work with the other National Center programs to help with business development for all of our clients. With the U.S. Commercial Service, they assist us with the market research information on the data that they have on doing business with specific countries. So that'll be a great resource. If you're looking at doing business with a specific country, we can get you the demographic information, as well as if your product and service is something that country is buying. So this is a little bit more information about the U.S. Commercial Service. It says the U.S. Commercial Service is the trade promotion arm of the United States Department of Commerce and the International Trade Administration. The Commercial Service is the group of trade professionals in over 100 U.S. cities, as well as 75 countries. And so it's got the global outreach. And that's why we bring this organization in partnership with our program to help us to be able to do the global outreach. And so the U.S. Commercial Service website is the www.export.gov. So that'll be a good website to check out if you're interested in doing export business. We also have another partnership with the Export-Import Bank of the United States. So this organization focuses on businesses, assisting businesses with access to capital for international exports. If traditional banks are not willing to work with businesses on getting into exporting, they usually see that as a higher risk. And so in working with the Import-Export Bank, they understand about the risks involved in terms of the export business, and they also will be able to guide our clients and help finance their access to capital. So they work with a number of traditional and non-traditional banks to help fund those projects. And so the ultimate goal is to create good-paying American jobs, and it's all about job opportunities for our U.S. businesses. And like I said, this is my first presentation, and just brief, I just wanted to introduce myself as well. This is my contact information. I'm the project director for the export program. I have a specialist that works with me in helping us get our clients onboarded, and we're housed in the National Center's headquarters office in Mesa, Arizona. So thank you. Ahead.
My name is Garrett Marrero. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Maui Brewing Company. I'm originally from San Diego, California. For the last 17 years, I've been here in Maui. Started the business in 2005, and here we are today. Well, this is most certainly not what we started with. By comparison, this is a 5.5 acre site with 85,000 square feet of what I would call brewing mecca. A lot of high technology in here, restaurant, etc. We started with a kind of shady little metal warehouse production facility in Lahaina. And actually right before that we had our brew pub in Kahana, which was a 7-barrel system, very small place. Humble compared to today's standards. But the tanks you walked past on the way up today, those were the biggest tanks we owned when we started. So they're now our garden fixtures by comparison. This facility is the what we call kind of our flagship, or HQ, if you will. So we have the Kihei restaurant is here on the front portion of the building. Where on the side here is we refer to it as the tasting room. So we don't open it normally during the day. And honestly, a lot of reason this area is available to us right now is just staffing issues. Being able to find people to join the team and to frankly work is a challenge right now. And then we have about 65,000 square feet back here, which is all the brewing area. And I would say too that we're a brewery, distillery, and a winery. We actually produce all different types of beverage alcohol. Not wine, as most people would think, but cider is considered wine, and we like to dabble in that from time to time. So this is our outdoor cellar. So out here we have 9 250-barrel fermenting vessels, what we call fermenters, or FVs. So really wort production, wort is young beer. Basically we take malted barley and we mash it with hot water. It's kind of a oatmeal cereal-like process, right? And what that's doing is converting starches into sugars. We want those sugars, but then we want the grain, the malted barley, to stay behind. So we separate that, and all that rich nutrient and sugar-dense liquid called wort, that gets pumped out here to fermenters with yeast. And in these tanks is where the yeast does its magical process of converting sugars into alcohol and CO2. A cool thing out here too is you see how big these tanks are. Starting in 2005, we had very small tanks, and we did our entire annual production of beer in 2005 would fit in less than one of these tanks. And so nowadays these are full all the time, and we've recently been talking about adding 9 more along the road here. I think craft beer drinkers, their tastes have changed over the years, especially when you're talking about IPA and, whether what used to be piney and, really different style IPA is now much more juicy. So even though Big Swell IPA is still the name, it's a very different beer today than it was back in 2006 and 2007 when we first created that one.
And it's always going to continue to change.
Yeah, I think as a business owner, you've always got to listen to your audience. And when you see things changing in the market, there are some things that maybe you need to be steadfast on, but there are others that you need to adapt in order to stay relevant, frankly, in the market. Pre-COVID, we had a little over 700 teammates between the production brewery location and the 4 restaurants. We are somewhere in that 350 to 400 range now. That's a moving target because the model has shifted so much as it pertains to COVID. The brewery has as many, if not more, than we had pre-COVID, but the restaurants, of course, because of the self-serve, order at your table, every location has different kind of formats to it because of the varied restrictions here in Hawaii. We may be a state, but each county played by its own rules. And so with the 4 restaurants between 2 islands, it presented a challenge. The hardest parts were laying off teammates, right? And I have to give kudos to my teammate, Chris Tebow. He's my partner. He's president of our restaurant division, so Maui Brewing Restaurant Group. And between him and his team, he had to lay off something on the order of 600 people in the span of a day. And that wasn't easy. That wasn't easy for anybody. It's definitely not something I would have wanted to do. But here at the brewery, we were able to get by for quite some time without doing layoffs. At the outset, we looked at 5 weeks or so to flatten the curve, and it became clear to us in late May, when we didn't have orders coming in or really any beer going out, that we had finished painting the building, we'd done all the things we could do with the team, and we did have to do a layoff. That was certainly the toughest part. I think as an owner, as a CEO, it's your job to insulate your teammates from a lot of the fear. that was being pushed around, especially from a financial standpoint. We were having weekly meetings on burn rate and cash position and what is the plan for next week, and things would change, and what's now the plan for even today, right? So fortunately, we have a great team. We did lose our CFO in this past December, passed unexpectedly, but through his hard work and support, we were in a very strong financial position even going into COVID. We both had the idea that this can't be so good forever, so we got to build a nice nest egg, and we had that reserve. So we saw a recession, we didn't see a pandemic, but that carried us through. And I would say just the unpredictability and the constantly changing rules, which trying to navigate that here in Hawaii was just an impossibility. So you were just hopeful you were in compliance most of the time. Yeah.
So you said we're sitting in HQ, we're sitting in the flagship store. How many are there on other islands?
Sure, so we have 4 locations. We have 2 on Oahu and 2 on Maui. So it's Kihei here. Our original site is actually Kahana, which is the northwest side of the island here, just north of Lahaina. So we still own and operate that location from day one. And then we have on Oahu, we have Kailua and we have Waikiki. So each one has its own nuances, and I think our smallest location is Kahana, the original, and that's about just shy of 5,000 square feet. And then working your way up to Waikiki, that one is the biggest restaurant location of about 18,000 square feet or so.
Have you ever thought about bringing it to the mainland area?
Yeah, absolutely. We sell in the mainland now beer and seltzer. We're starting to expand to take our spirits to the mainland as well, our Kupu Spirits line. We have considered restaurants over there, where they make sense, but this last couple of years, of course, has been focused on keeping this ship running and making sure that we grow smart. And I would say that because of the success of our brands over 17 years, we've got a lot of great opportunities with locations that are coming to us, both in the mainland and abroad. So I see us going in 2 directions, really, mainland and towards the APAC markets. So looking at Japan in particular, New Zealand, Australia.
So this is our main production facility. So about 65,000 square feet under roof. It's just a lot of noise, there's a lot of action, forklifts, keg filling, cans running. This is really dry storage in most part. We do have some liquid storage here for our distillery. So we have to import certain base ingredients and store them safely. Safety is a huge factor in a brewery and distillery. Things are flammable, so you gotta make sure you're caring for it. And you see in the back all those big stacks of cans. Those are actually empty cans. Those are made over on Oahu, and they ship them over here for us to fill them and seam them. But this area is going to rapidly change in the next 6 months. This will be a 2-level building here with a bunch more packaging equipment, so we can take our efficiency up in the packaging. From 250 cans a minute, we'll be running at 550 cans a minute with 2 robots and a lot of cool equipment.
How do you plan on correlating your brand going internationally?
I think every time we have an evolution, whether that be going from the single brew pub location in Kahana to a production brewery in Lahaina to this facility and then 3 restaurants within, it was just under 3 years. Each restaurant has its own personality, and so you have to take a step back and look at the entire picture, but also how do you make this one its own thing? Because the last thing we ever want to create is something that someone leaves and says, "Oh, I've been to one, I've been to them all." That would not be a good thing for us. I used to have a rule that was like, if there's more than 2, I won't go, right? And of course now we have 4, so it's a little bit different. But that's also because each place is nuanced in its own personality. So correlating that to going international, I think understanding the audience, having a presence there that is beyond, hey, our business is open for you to come spend money. It's what do we do for the community? What do we bring to that area? And why are we relevant to be there? If we're not relevant, then why would we go there? And it's something that the communities we go to, as well as within the company, everyone should be celebrating our arrival, not hating on it. There will always be a little of that. But I think in particular, Japan and Hawaii have a kinship for sure. So, going over to Japan, I've probably never had more warm reception than our fans in Japan. Every time I go there, it's just like, these last 2 years have been difficult for not being able to go because I was on a pretty much at least an annual trip there. And the same thing stands for the mainland. As right now we contract brew, we just started that recently through a partner brewery for our mainland production. But we look to buy a brewery on the mainland or build one and really invest in a community there to give us that footprint locally. So everything that we built here, we plan to build outside of Hawaii as well.
So out here, this is our Tesla power packs. This is our battery bank. So we're solar powered brewery, but really a lot of times of the day we're battery powered. All of our solar directly feeds to the building. We're about 1.2 megawatts of solar energy here. Covers a substantial portion of our energy. It can range from 65 up to 90% of our energy depending on time of year and what productions we're doing. But any excess energy rolls over into the batteries. So at night, the batteries feed back to the building. What you see above us is a solar awning. Our building is completely covered in solar panels. So to generate that 1.2 megawatts of solar, it's thousands of panels up on the roof. We live in a beautiful place and we want to keep it that way. So trying to work with as little fossil fuel, as little plastic, as little trash really as possible is important to us.
What would help you achieve that goal of moving in both directions, mainland and abroad?
That's a constantly moving target right now, especially. Still restrictions that we have not only in Hawaii, but with Japanese visitors, also us going to Japan. To even start a meeting over there, I've got to sit in a hotel for 10 days. So that's difficult. The mainland is a little easier. I think though it's just finding the right spot. Again, because of the success of our company over 17 years, we have the access to the capital to be able to do those projects. I think the number one thing, frankly, is time, right? There's never enough time as a business owner, and especially in my position. There's still a lot of things that I do on a day-to-day that really should be delegated. And again, with the recent loss of our good friend and CFO, Russell Adkins, that's left a bit of a hole. So we did actually just today get an accepted offer for that position. So I'm very excited to bring the candidate on board. And that will allow me to maybe step back a little bit to focus working on versus in the company. And I know that sounds like a small thing, but as a CEO and as the person who had the vision for the company, you need to be able to focus on that vision and to drive that vision, not working in a day-to-day stuck in a computer capacity. But you have to balance that with the time on the floor. I joke the shaking hands and kissing babies side of seeing your teammates and asking about their husbands or wives and kids and those types of things, because we are at the end of the day, we're in Ohana here, and many of us don't have family here in the island, so we fill that role. I'd love to grow team pay, team benefits, just to bring some of the fun back that was, the fun police came in COVID. We weren't allowed to have beers together, right? So being able to do those things again are number one. With the hire of our CFO today, I feel really strong that we've got a great C-suite again. This year we should grow somewhere around 40%, which is a pretty good growth rate coming out of COVID. And that's a testament to everybody in this building and the three others of the hard work that they've put together over the last couple of years. That when we had COVID, when we were at our darkest, I said, there's no point in hanging your head low and being upset, and we can cry over this, or we can build ourselves to be coming out of COVID like a rocket ship. And that's what we did. We didn't want to get bogged down with the negativity that was out there, and instead sort of, okay, how do we reform it? How do we move things around to really use this as an advantage and come out ahead? And a testament to the team that we were able to do that. It's amazing to be brewing as much beer and liquid overall that we do, and still be short production. We just need more beer, and there are worse problems to have.
So this is the canning line. So we run a Cronus 32 valve filler, Angelus forehead seamer. That's all like technical jargon, but essentially this equipment here takes empty cans and makes full cans out of them. So it puts our beer, our seltzer, our canned cocktails as well as even our cold brew coffee that we do into the can so we can ship it out from our docks here. But this is one point where we're expanding and making more investment here in the building, taking it from, like I said, about 250 cans a minute up to 550 can a minute line. That'll span essentially the whole building.
So where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I talked with my C-suite recently about this, and God, I have a short-term goal, and short-term for me is a couple of years of working 4 days a week. That's really big, lofty goals, and that's just because, I've been grinding it out for 17 years now at this point, and it's time that, as much as I want to work on the business, that I also think about myself a little bit, and at times, you recognize that you might need to be a little selfish occasionally, because there is no question that if things turned, that your commitment would be only reaffirmed and dive back in for 7 days if that's what it takes. And that's where I currently am, due to not only COVID, but the loss of our CFO. But yeah, in 5 years, I'd love to have at least one location in Japan, another in a Western state, I'll say, and just looking to grow our brand. The spirit of Hawaii, the spirit of aloha, when you say Maui, people have this vision in their head, whether they've been here or not. And I'd love to take that vision and give them that experience closer to them. So being able to build our brand across the entire country is something that I look at as certainly a goal for me. We have been widely accepted, and not only for our work in beer, because that's what we do is beer, but what we are is so much more than that. And it's how we invest in the community, how we treat others. I think beyond that, it's just continue to connect with the community that we're in wherever we are.
So if you were to go back to those 17 years ago, what would you tell your younger self that started in this business?
Sure. Well, I was 26 when I started this company with Melanie, my ex-wife, still one of my closest friends today. I would probably tell myself a lot of things, but knowing my 26-year-old self, I wouldn't listen. I think like many 26-year-old men, you know everything, or you think you do, and you're infallible, which is actually, I think, in this business, you're willing to take a lot more risks than maybe you are at 43. And at 26, I didn't have anything to lose. It was a dream that I was pursuing, and if I failed, I could always go get a job. Whereas at 43, it's a different situation. I could go get a job, but I'd be the worst employee you've ever seen. So I think a few of the things would be to maybe focused as I was. I think there are areas I could have focused a little bit better on. I think in terms of my relationship sometimes with Melanie, and looking at, as much as I was driven to see the business succeed, I often didn't make the right decisions in taking the right path as it pertains to a relationship. So knowing what's most important to you is really important. And I might have thought about bringing more people into the company earlier than trying to do everything myself, and that also threads into that relationship discussion. So I think it was just defining when you need the help and looking for the right help rather than trying to take it all on your shoulders. And as much as you need to work your butt off to succeed, take a breath. Yeah.
If you met somebody that wanted to get into brewing, what would you tell them about the business?
That's kind of a funny question. Actually, I meet a lot of people that want to get into the brewing business, and my first response to them is usually just don't do it. It's a lot of glamour sometimes from the outside. It's like, oh, cool, your job's making beer, and you have this beautiful facility. What they don't see is the 17 years of hard work that it took to get to this point. But it's a very difficult business, very capital intensive. I would say make sure it's your passion. I would say make sure you look at your finances and fully understand that. If you're asking or thinking about how much vacation you're going to get in your first year, it's probably not the work for you. And if you're getting into beer for money, then you should probably find another job. But if all those things sound okay and you're willing to grind it out and work harder than you've ever worked, then brewing may be for you.
Growing up, who was your role model, and who do you contribute your strong work ethic to?
I think my strong work ethic definitely comes from my mom and dad. They split when we were, God, I was early teens, maybe I think 13, 14, somewhere in there. And so, you know, that was tough, but that hardens you a little bit. That kind of helps you grow up. I often talk to my older sister and I say, you know, when that happened, that kind of forced your, as I call it, my inner lion, if you will, to come out, because you learn to develop skills that you probably wouldn't have otherwise. Certainly not a fan of using that as a way to grow, but you know, you got to live with what life puts in front of you and make the best of it. My dad was extremely hard on us when it comes to learning as much about everything as we can. So it was become the expert was something he always told us. Positive mental attitude. We couldn't just do something; we had to be the best at it. And we were instilled with the knowledge that no matter what it was that we wanted to accomplish, even if we didn't know how to do it, the only issue was we didn't know how to do it yet. And so we could find that information and problem solve our way to success. From a, what do you call it, someone who I admired or a mentor, I loved Arnold Schwarzenegger growing up, frankly. Like, I loved Commando, and I always have worked out, and so that was a big part of my life. You know, watching him through his career and becoming governor. I know he's probably not the first person to think of, but also there was a part of me that loved Gordon Gekko and the piece of that character, that fictional character in Wall Street. And truth be told, before I was in brewing, I was in finance, and that was because of what I saw in the stock market. And what I loved about that was the dynamic nature, that every day was something new. And it was almost like in the Matrix, you know, you have to read the code. That's what, to me, you see on the tickers, right? And you see wealth moving, and you see opportunity, right? Chaos breeds opportunity, and you have to be prepared to pounce on that opportunity. So.